How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kuf Nun, Daf 150 of Masechta BavaBasra. We are moving over here. It's taken 150 days. 150 days, that's a lot of days. That's like 5 months. It's taken us like 5 months to get here. But, we're moving 150. Interesting. It feels like that's kind of like the turning point. I feel like most Masechtas, Daf Kuf, Daf 100 is like the turning point, because most Masechtas, once you're at Daf Kuf, how many pages could be left? But if you're at Daf 150, is I feel like now it's like the end is in sight. The end of BavaBasra is in sight. Ooh. Now that is going to wrap up a summer run. Getting Kiddushin Bavakam B'Mitzia BavaBasra. Oof. Wow. All right. 1 second. There we go. Alright, let's do it. What are we talking today? Shchivmira, probably? Pshita, yeah, why not? Okay, we're going to start on Daf Kuf Nun, Amud Aleph, 2 lines before it gets wide. After the 2 dots. Pshita, it is obvious that Amar Metaltale Leflanya, that if he says Metaltalin, movable objects, are going to Planya, Kol mani tashmishte koni, so Planya gets all of his stuff. Levar mechiti v'sari, except for wheat and barley. Planya gets his stuff, but not his wheat and not his barley. Kol mitaltale leflanya. But if he says all of my movable stuff goes to Planya, well then afilu chite v'sari. Well then it includes the wheat and the barley. V'afilu rechaim elyona. And even if he's got a mill to grind wheat into flour, and the mill has 2 parts, an upper stone and a lower stone, it would even include the upper stone of the mill. But the lower millstone is excluded. Kol de mitaltel, that anything that is technically movable, well then, in that case it would include even the lower millstone. Azoy. Ibayu de asakasha. Avdo kimekarkoya. Oh, kimitaltelo domi. Is an eved considered like karke, or is an eved considered like mitaltlin? Omele Rav Acha b'eder Rav Avia le Rav Ashi, says Rav Acha b'eder Rav Avia to Rav Ashi. Toshma, come in here. Hamocher esayir. Oh. This was a Mishnah in Perak Hamocher esaboyis, I believe. This was like half a Masechta ago or more. Woo! What was it? It was on Daf Samaches. Yeah, that's more than half a Masechta ago. Woo! This is some Masechta. A biggie. Hamocher Seir, somebody who sells a city mocher botim. In the sale includes houses. Borishichin umayris, pits, ditches, and vaults. Umerchatzos, and bathhouses, uveis abadin, and olive presses, uveis hashlochin, and so I think this generally based hashlochin is like a field that requires irrigation, so I guess fields. Avalo esa metaltalin, but metaltalin are excluded in this from the sale of the city, not movable objects. Uvizman she'omar hi v'chol ma shebesocha. And if he says, I'm selling you the city and everything in it, well then, afilu ayuba behemo avodim, harei kulan mechurin. Well then, even if there were animals or avodim, they are included in the sale. So this is a very funny kind of mishnah, because on the one hand, this is mamish the question that we had back half a Masechta ago. That on the one hand, he says that when you sell the city, it excludes metaltalin. It excludes metaltalin, and that means it excludes avodim. But then it says if you sell the city and everything in it, then it includes the metaltalin and even avodim. So it's like kind of weird, because on the one hand, avodim seem to not be karka, because we say that when you sell the city, so avodim are excluded. And yet they also seem to not really be metaltalin, because when we say that the city is sold together with everything in it, then it even includes avodim. Kilu, as if by default they would be excluded, but we're saying they even include avodim. So it's kilu, they're not karka, but they also seem to not be kind of like ordinary metaltalin either, because there's a big chiddush that they are included when you say that you're selling everything in it as well, like the city with everything in it. Okay, so now I understand if we say that avodim are considered like metaltalin mishumachi lo mizdabin bireisha. Okay, so I get it if we want to say that avodim are considered metaltalin, and for that reason, when you sell the city, avodim are excluded because the city is karka and avodim are metaltalin. But if you say that avodim are like karka, amai lo mizdabin, then if they are karka, then why are they excluded from the sale of the city? But then the Gemara says, but what? So you're saying that they are metaltalin? But that also doesn't really make sense, because my afilu. Then why, when the city is sold together with everything in it, we say even avodim are included? What do you mean? Of course avodim are included. If we're saying that avodim are metaltalin, well then if you sell the city and everything in it, of course it includes includes metaltalin, and of course that includes the avodim. Why are we saying even avodim? It sounds like they aren't really metaltalin either. So rather, what do you need to say vis-a-vis the metaltalin? Why are we saying that even avodim are included? Because clearly there's some kind of distinction between regular metaltalin and avodim. Shiny metaltalin denied, metaltalin lo nayid. That metaltalin that move on their own, such as an evid, is different than metaltalin that are inanimate. So therefore, I feel if that's the case, then you can even argue that avodim are considered like karka, and the reason why they're excluded from the reisha is shiny mikarka denied, mikarka delonayid. That there's a distinction between karkos that are inanimate and karkos that are animate. So this is not so to get back to our question of, are avodim considered like karka or considered like metaltalin? I can argue that they're considered like karka. I can argue that they're considered like metaltalin. I can argue that they're considered like karka. Okay. Says Ravina to Ravashi, Tashmakam Nira Kosev Konochosav Le'avdo. Okay. As we've seen recently, that somebody writes all of his property to his eved. Yotza ben Chorin. So if he writes all of his, nechasim, all of his property, to his, all of his estate to his eved, so then the eved goes free. Well, I guess all of his property, his eved goes free. Shir karka kolshu. However, right, because we said all of his property includes his eved, and therefore if he writes everything, if he gives everything to his eved, so he's giving everything to his eved, including the eved himself is being given to the eved, i.e. his freedom. Shir karka kolshu, but if the adon left over a bit of karka, he says to Eved, I'm giving you everything except for a little bit of karka. He doesn't say which karka. Well, that might even, so that karka might be referring to the Eved himself. In which case, lo yotza ben chorin doesn't go free, because maybe what the adon is saying is that you don't go free. Right? I'm giving you everything except for a little bit of karka. Maybe that karka is him. He doesn't go free. Rabbi Shimon Omer says, Rabbi Shimon the olamu ben chorin, that the Eved does go free, unless the adon says, I'm giving everything to Ploni, Abdi, my Eved, chutz mi echad mi ribo shaban, except for 1/10,000th of my property. 1/10,000th of my property isn't going to the Eved. In that case, we don't know which 1/10,000th it is. That might be the Eved. So therefore, in that case, he won't go free. V'amar Rav Din bar Yosef, it says Rav Din bar Yosef, Amar Reb Elazar. It says Rav Din bar Yosef, the name of Reb Elazar, also metaltalin shir eitzel Eved, v'lo also metaltalin shir eitzel ksuba. That we consider that even if he would have said that I'm giving everything to my Eved except for a little bit of metaltalin, then that would be the same thing, according to the Tanna Kama, that the Eved would not go free because maybe the metaltalin is the Eved. But we do not say the same thing by ksuba, which we saw the other day, that if a that if a person says that his wife is going to inherit together with the rest of his sons, so then so then we say that she won't be able to collect a ksuba because she's accepting sort of the part of the estate in lieu of her ksuba. However, if he had left over a palm tree, for example, so meaning he had divided up, he's dividing up his whole estate amongst his kids and his wife, but he left over one palm tree, let's say, that he didn't give to anybody. So then the wife would be able to collect her ksuba from that palm tree. We say that since she collects from the palm tree, maybe she can collect from everything else as well. But and that would dafka be if he left over karka, like a palm tree, but not if he left over some metaltalin for her. She would not accept her collect her ksuba because she's collecting part of the estate. Okay. Rav says to Rav Nachman, my taima, how come there's this distinction? How come we say that by the eved, we say it's not just karka but also metaltalin, right? That if he says to the eved, I'm giving you everything except for a little bit of metaltalin, then the eved does not go free. Because we're saying that whether he says except for a little bit of karka or whether he says except for a little bit of metaltalin, it makes no difference. And yet we say by the ksuba it's davka karka and not metaltalin. So says v'amalei Rav Nachman, my time. How come? Avda metaltala who? Because an eved is metaltalin. Because an eved is metaltalin. Umetaltalin metaltala aveshir. And therefore, the eved who's metaltalin would be considered not included in what's being given to him, the eved, right? So if the Adon says, I'm giving you the eved, everything except for a little bit of metaltalin, that could be the eved himself. But the ksuba, however, is collected from karkos, right? There's a lien on the husband's property to pay the ksuba, and therefore, for someone to be left over to collect the ksuba from, it would have to be karka and not metaltalin. So we see that Rava says to Rav Nachman that avodim are metaltalin. To get back to our question, is avodim karka metaltalin? We're saying it's metaltalin. So Amar lei. So Rav Nachman responds, actually, mishum dilo kros gita masnina la. No, actually, the reason why when he says that I'm giving everything to the eved except for a little bit of metaltalin, the reason why the eved does not go free is not because the eved is considered metaltalin. Rather, it's because it has to be a proper detachment, right? Like we know from Masechta Gittin, right? If a person divorces his wife, it has to be a complete divorce. It can't be like, you're divorced except under the condition that you never ever drink wine ever again. You can't, right? That you're not allowed to do that because he's still exerting control over her. It has to be a complete divorce, disconnect, separation, complete separation. And the same thing would apply to a get shichur, right? If you have an eved and you give the eved a get shichur, a document of emancipation, and the eved goes free, it has to be a complete. The document has to be a complete separation. Now, if the Adon gives the eved a document that says, in the document, what does it say? I'm giving you everything, but I'm still retaining a little bit of metaltalin. That's what the document says. I'm giving you everything. So the document in itself is not a complete separation. It's saying, I'm giving you everything, but I'm also still retaining a little bit. So he's still exerting control over some of his property. So the document does not represent a document of complete separation because he's still exerting control over some of the property. And therefore, it is not a proper get shichur, and that is why, says Rav Nachman, that is why the eved does not go free, but it's not necessarily because the eved is considered metaltal. Rav Nachman, says Rav in the name of Rav Nachman, Chamisha, there are 5 scenarios where it is important that all of the property is included. Let's see what these 5 are. And these are them: Shchiv Mira, Avdo, Ishto, Uvanov, and Mavrachas. Shchiv Mira, Ditnan. Okay, what does it mean? We're going to go through each one. So what does it mean that by a Shchiv Mira, it's important that all of the property is included? Ditnan, as we learned in our Mishnah. I think it was the last Mishnah that we learned. Hakol Sev, where am I? Ditnan, Shchiv Mira, Shekosav, Kol Nechosav La'acherim, that a Shchiv Mira who wrote all of his property to somebody, but Vishir Karka Kolshu, but he left a bit of property for himself. Well then, matnosu kayemis. Well then, if he survives, the gift stands. It's not considered matnas chimera. Let's go weiter. Lo shir karka kolshu. But if he gave everything away, ein matnosa kayemis, then it does not. The gift does not stand if he survives. Meaning, this concept of a shchimera, that he gives a gift to somebody, and if he dies, then the person receives it, but if he survives, then it's not a gift, and he keeps it, and the shchimera who survives keeps it. Well, that is if he gives everything away. If he gives everything away, then if he dies, the recipients will receive what they get. And if he survives, then not. Then he keeps it. But if he only gave away part of his property, well then even if he survives, the gift stands. So we see that dafka by a shchiv mira, he has to give away everything. Avdo, and what are we talking about is Eved. Titnan, as we learned in a Mishnah, this was in Peah, right? I think it was in Peah. Hakosev konochosev le'avdo, that somebody who writes all of his property to his Eved, right? This was in Peah, right? What is this? Somebody writes all of his property to his Eved. So all of his property is Eved Yotze ben Chorin, then he goes free. Shir, Karka Kolshu, but if he left over a little bit of Karka, Lo Yotze ben Chorin, then he does not go free. So Davka, he only goes free if it's all of the property. Ishto, by his wife, the Amar V'Yudah Amar Shmuel, Hakosev Kol Nechasev L'Ishto, Lo Sela Apotrope. Right, we learned in Yesh Nochalin? Yeah, that if somebody writes all of his property to his wife, she is considered a representative of the property for the children. He's not actually giving it to her as a gift. And that would be if he gives all of the property to his wife. One of his children, the Tanan, as we learn in the Mishnah, Hakosev Kol Nechasev Levanov, that if he writes all of his property to his children, V'chosav Le'ishto Karka Kolshuk of the Ksubasa, that if where are we? Right, exactly. That's right. So we had said, we referenced this, I think, just a few minutes ago, right? That if a person includes his wife in his estate, right? So normally the estate would only be divided up among his children, but if he includes his wife in the estate, well then she receives her share in the estate in lieu of her ksuba. She won't collect her ksuba anymore. But that's only if nothing was left over in the estate, right? For example, if he left over a palm tree that nobody would get, well then she would be able to collect her ksuba from the palm tree, and then just like from the palm tree, she can also claim the rest of the ksuba from the rest of the kids, so from the rest of the estate. So we say this concept of when somebody includes his wife in the inheritance of his estate, she doesn't collect the ksuba. That's only when everything has been given, is going to be divided among the children and the wife. However, if there was something excluded from that, for example, a palm tree, well then that doesn't apply, and she would be able to collect her ksuba. Okay. Mavrachas, what's a mavrachas? Who can tell me what a mavrachas is? Mavrachas is a widow, right? If you have a woman who is married and her husband passed away and there's a child, they have a son, and now she's getting remarried and she has her own property, and she knows that if she gets remarried, her property that she owns is now going to belong to her new husband, and she doesn't want that. She wants to hold on to her property. So what she does is she gives her property to her son so that it's not hers, and when she marries her new husband, he won't get the property. But if her new husband dies, or if they get divorced, she's going to want to get her property back. So if she gives all of her property to her son, well then she'll be entitled to get it back in the case of if her husband dies or they get divorced. But if she only gives away part of her property, then that would not apply. So mavrachas damar my mavrachas tzricha shetichtov kol nichaseh. She would have to give away all of her property. Uvechulu mitaltle have shir levar mi ksuba. And in all of these scenarios, even if you left over metaltlin, you excluded metaltlin, that would be considered that you excluded something. It would not be considered having included everything. Levar mi ksuba, except for when it comes to ksuba, because as we saw earlier, that the rabbis put a lien on the husband's property for the ksuba, not metaltlin, and therefore when we're talking about collecting the ksuba, it would have to be karka left over, not Mitaltlin. If there is metaltlin that's specifically referenced in the ksuba to be used for the payment of the ksuba, and they still exist, haveshir, that would be considered something that is excluded. Omar, if a person says nechosai liflanya, that my nechosim go to ploni. So now the Gemara is going to give a whole list of things that are considered nechosim. Avda ikre nichsei. An eved is considered nechosim ditnan, that we learn in a Mishnah. Kosev called nechosav le'avdo. If somebody writes all of his nechosim to his eved, yotze ben chorin, the eved goes free, because included in the nechosim is the eved himself. So we see that eved is considered nechosim. Ara ikre nichsei. Land is called nechosim ditnan, as we learned in Kiddushin. Nechosim sheish lemachrayis, nechosim that have responsibility, right? That the responsibility for paying a loan falls, right? It falls on them, right? That there's insurance for it, whatever. And that's a reference to karka. Can be acquired with money, documents, and chazakos. So we see that property is called nechosim. Glima, a cloak, ikre nichse, is called nechosim. The Tanaz, we learn in the Mishnah of she'ein le'em achrayis, and nechosim she'ein le'em achrayis, metaltalin, such as a cloak, and we're calling it nechosim she'ein le'em achrayis, ein niknin ela b'mishicha, are acquired with mishicha by giving them a tug. Zuzeh ikre nichse, money is called nichse. The Tanaz, we learned in the Mishnah of she'ein le'em achrayis niknin, im nechosim she'ein le'em achrayis, that nechosim she'ein le'em achrayis can be acquired via nechosim sheish achrayis, right? As we know, if you acquire a shtickle property, you can also acquire metaltlin together with that. Because of shtar b'chazaka, right? You could be kone the property, the nechosim sheish achrayis, whether with money, whether with a document, whether with a chazaka. Kiyadar Rapapa, like Rapapa, we've seen this already several times. Havale trace alfei zuzah bechozai, he had 12,000 zuzahs by the chozais. And he was makne this money to Rav Shmuel Bar Acha agav asipa de beise. Right, he gave like the entryway to his house to Shmuel Bar Acha, Rav Shmuel Bar Acha, and by Rav Shmuel Bar Acha being kone that little bit of property, he was also able to be kone the 12,000 zuzis so that he can go and collect it for Rav Papa Kiyasa. And when Rav Shmuel Bar Acha came back with his money, with Rav Papa's money, Nafak Laipe Ad Tovech, Rav Papa went to greet him. He went out to a place called Tovech to greet him because he was so happy that he was finally able to get his money back. So we see that money is called nechasim because it's considered, right? Because it's nechasim she'ein le'em achrayis, that could be a nickname with nechasim she'esh le'em achrayis. So we see that money is called nechasim she'ein le'em achrayis. Documents are called nechasim. To Amar Rabba Bar Yitzchak, says Rabba Bar Yitzchak, Shnei shtaros saying there are two, halachas by shtaros. Omar, if he says zechu besode zeh lefloni v'chis v'lo es hashtar. If somebody, a landowner says to, right, it says to, it sounds like two people, acquire this property for so and so, for Ploni, and write him a document and give it to him as proof of the sale. So choser, where am I? Choser b'shtar, ve'eno choser b'sada. So he can change it. He can renege on the document so long as Ploni hasn't yet been given the document. He could say, "Look, I don't want there to be a record of this sale." But he can't, right? But once these people acquire the property for Ploni, he can't be choser on that. But so long as Ploni has not yet received the document, he could say, "Look, you know what? Actually, I don't want you to write that document. I don't want a record of the sale." Okay. But if he said, "Acquire this property for Ploni under the condition that you write a document," well, then choser bein b'shtar bein b'sada. Then so long as Ploni has not yet received the document, the seller could change his mind and say, "You know what? I don't want you giving the document to Ploni." And since he's not getting a document, the sale also doesn't stand because he made one dependent on the other. He says, "Al minas, I'm selling it, right? Acquire this property for Ploni under the condition that you give him the document," but he could renege on the document so long as Ploni has not received it. And then Memela, the sale won't stand either because they were made dependent one on the other. Rav Chia bar Avin Amar Rav Huna, this is Rav Chia bar Avin named Rav Huna, Shlosha Shtaris Hein, there are three, I guess, special halachas by Shtaris, Trei Hani Damarin, the two examples that we just gave, Idach, and the third is, Im Kadam Ochav B'chasav Zashtar, that if you have a person who owns property, and he wants that if an interested buyer comes around, he should be able to make the sale immediately. He doesn't want that if an interested buyer comes around, he's going to have to now find a scribe to write him up a document and say, that'll take a whole thing, and who knows, he might lose the sale. So if he has, what does it say? If the seller kind of in advance wrote a document with all the necessary details, he was just going to have to, I guess, fill in the blanks of who the buyer is and maybe the price, whatever it is. But maybe he had the price already included, whatever it is. He had the document already written in advance, okay, so that he wouldn't have to waste any time when a buyer shows up. As we taught, that you can write a document for a seller even though there is not a buyer yet. And now, once the buyer makes a chazaka on the property, he acquires the document wherever it is. And this is what we've taught. That nechasim she'ein lehem achrayus, which in this case is the shtar, can be acquired by way of nechasim she'esh lehem achrayus, in this case the property. 1 second. Yeah, okay. Yeah, fine. Together with the property, whether he's acquiring it with kesef, shtar, or chazaka. Behema ikre nichse. Animals are called nichse. The Tanan, as we learn in a Mishnah, makdish nechasav. If a person is makdish, is nechasim, vaysaban behema. And now we're talking about what if there was an animal? What do you do? I.e., an animal would be included in the ekdish. Ru'ui legab mizbeach. So if it's an animal that is fit for the mizbeach, zecharim, add the words yimachu letzorchei olis. So male animals will be sold for ola korbans. V'nekevis yimachu letzorchei zivchei shlam will be sold for as zivchei shlam korbanos. So we see that being makdish your nechasim includes animals. So we see animals are called nechasim. Ofis ikre nichse. Birds are called nechasim. The Tanan is related to Mishnah makdish nechasim. Birds are makdish nechasim. V'yibahen dvarim arin legam mizbech. There are things that are fit for the mizbech: yenos, wine, shmanim, oils, ve'ofis, and birds. So we see that birds are also included in nechasim. Tefillin ikre nichse. Tefillin are called nechasim. The Tanan is related to Mishnah makdish nechasim. If somebody is makdish his nechasim, ma'in lo tefillin. We have to evaluate the value of the tefillin, because the tefillin would be included in the hektish. Shibaylu Sefer Torah. They ask, what about a Sefer Torah? Skip the next few lines. Teku. Ich weiß nicht. Chever. That was daf Kuf Nun of Masechta BavaBasra. We learned some interesting stuff about metaltalin, if avodim would be considered metaltalin, and then at the end we just learned about all sorts of stuff, like when you say nechasim, what's included in nechasim, lots of stuff. Peace.